Peter B. Collins News and Comment. It's Friday, February 9th, 2018. In the dark of night, the dysfunctional Congress passed a stinky budget bill. And the government was technically shut down for a few hours. Only it appears a few janitors were affected. And as I begin the News and Comment podcast this Friday, I have to mention that here in California, we are having balmy weather, and I have not commented on it because I know many of you are fighting the depths of winter. But for us, it's pleasant. Today, it's almost 80 degrees outside, but we haven't had the rain that we need. We haven't had rain for weeks now, and we seem to be drifting back into drought territory. So there was a surprise last night. I flipped on the TV expecting to see the House of Representatives duking it out over a bill that the Senate was supposed to have passed in the late afternoon, which is based on a special deal between Republican Mitch McConnell and Democrat Chuck Schumer. It didn't follow the ordinary process of allowing committees to put their budgets together and matching appropriations bill. And the big surprise was that Rand Paul, the junior senator from Kentucky, the son of Paul, Congressman Ron Paul, he surprised everybody by launching a kind of filibuster. Now, what he actually did was use senatorial prerogative to delay consideration of a cloture vote, and then he sporadically spoke throughout the evening. I did see Senator Mike Lee of Utah spell Rand Paul for a bit, but mostly it was the Rand Paul show. And before I describe what he did, I want to tell you that Rachel Maddow really mischaracterized Rand Paul in a sweeping and partisan generalization. She said he did it just because he can. And while Rand Paul is hypocritical himself, what he was doing was reasonable, rational, and within bounds of Senate propriety. But it was just dismissed because, well, he's a Republican and Russia, you know? So what Rand Paul did was point out the hypocrisy of the Republican Party. And he didn't quite include himself in a way that I would. But what he said was accurate. He said, the reason I'm here tonight is to put people on the spot. I want people to feel uncomfortable. I want them to have to answer people at home who said, how come you were against President Obama's deficits, and then how come you're for Republican deficits? Now, that's a very important question. And it is at the center of the hypocrisy of the former deficit hawks who opposed any kind of spending by Barack Obama. And his stimulus package back in, 2009? It was $800 million, but it was loaded with bullshit to win over some Republican votes, and I don't think any of those materialized. So Rand Paul is correct about the overall hypocrisy of Republicans. What he failed to mention was mentioned by Democrat Brian Schatz, senator from Hawaii. Rand Paul voted for a tax bill that blew a $1.5 trillion hole in the budget. Now he is shutting down the government for 3 hours because of the debt. The chance to demonstrate fiscal discipline was on the tax vote. Delaying this vote isn't a profile in courage, it's a cleanup. And I think that's accurate. So because I enjoy the 3-hour time shift here on the West Coast, I was able to watch the machinations of the Senate up through 1 a.m. Eastern Time when they did ram through a vote. And it was really strange because Leader McConnell called for a return to regular order, and the first bill that popped up was a no-brainer. It was about, allowing the flag to be flown at half-staff when first responders die. And then suddenly, they had the budget bill on the floor. It passed 71 to 28 just before 2 o'clock Washington time. And then members of the House had to rouse themselves out of the sack if they ever went to bed because their vote occurred at 5:30 a.m., 240 to 186 for the bill, and that was based on many Democrats who voted for it and many Republicans who voted against it. The Freedom Caucus was able to round up, I believe, about 60-plus votes against this, requiring the Democrats to once again save the asses of the Republicans. So it was quite a surprise. And again, with the caveats I mentioned, it's well within Rand Paul's rights to conduct himself this way. Paul Krugman gets it right in his Friday column in the New York Times. Republicans never really cared about deficits. Their real target was Obama. And he opens by quoting Paul Ryan, who was then he's now the House Speaker, and he was, of course, the vice presidential candidate in 2012. He said, "The United States is facing a crushing burden of debt, and that it could capsize the economy." Citing the horrors of big deficits, Republicans refused to raise the federal debt ceiling back then, threatening to create financial turmoil and effectively blackmailing Obama into cutting spending on domestic programs. And what they passed last night was a whole barrel of pork. Just a little bit in there for everybody, and a whole lot for the Pentagon, because they've cranked up defense spending. A nominal $634 billion this year, $634 for the fiscal year that's underway, $700 billion for the one that starts in October, and $716 billion for fiscal year 19. Now, that doesn't include the off-the-books money at the Energy Department that handles all the nuclear costs, doesn't include the spy community, doesn't include Homeland Security, which is, in my view, part of the military these days. And so all of this sets the stage for a deal where, if it holds, Democrats will not attempt to shut down the government over the next 2 years. They'll have a 2-year budget, and this could stabilize some of the dysfunction, at least on Capitol Hill. But as long as Trump has got his finger on the Twitter, all kinds of mayhem can break out. Next week, it'll be over the Dreamers and trying to pass immigration legislation. And it's clear that Democrats have lost the leverage they had up until this point. And so, to me, it's pretty clear that we're going to trade release of the hostage Dreamers for at least some funding that will be deficit-based for Trump's southern border wall. And I fear that this is going to set the stage for Republicans to say, we don't know how we got here, but, we're broke. And so we can't do anything on infrastructure. We'll have to privatize that, let the Saudis buy some bridges over here. If we had the money, we'd want to do it ourselves. And then, of course, we're going to have to cut back Social Security and Medicare. They're really in different funds, and it doesn't affect the budget deficit. But because the cost of borrowing will go up, and the interest rates are likely to go up, they're going to create a train wreck and probably blame it on Obama or somebody else who is convenient. Here in San Francisco, we woke up to a surprise today. It was a billionaire fight in federal court as Uber was sued by Waymo, the self-driving car division of Google, which is actually now called Alphabet. And in the middle of a trial, after the former bad boy CEO of Uber, Travis Kalanick, had testified and avoided soiling himself too badly, it was announced today that Waymo and Uber have settled their trade secrets lawsuit for about $245 million in Uber stock. Now, this is frat boy Silicon Valley warfare, because Google already holds a big piece of Uber, and they just got a little bit more. The jury was dismissed, and, of course, the underlying complaint was that Uber had hired a guy named Anthony Lewandowski, who had been working for Waymo, and they brought him over, set him up in his own company, paid him $700 million or so, and the argument was that Lewandowski stole trade secrets from Waymo and gave them to Uber. And the critical issue relates to LiDAR. That's the radar system that enables self-driving automobiles. So this was quite a Donnybrook here in San Francisco, and it's been papered over with Uber stock. Meanwhile, I'll mention this, because the Winter Olympics are in South Korea, which is beyond the international dateline. The opening ceremonies have already occurred, but they'll be broadcast on NBC, I believe, tonight. And the Olympics are always fascinating. I'm not a big sports fan, but I like to watch. I get annoyed at NBC's, jingoistic coverage that's focused almost exclusively on Americans and how many medals we've won at any given point. But the sidebar to the Olympics will be the fact that the sister of Kim Jong-un, who is described as the ceremonial head of state of North Korea and a significant leader because of her blood connection to her brother, and he hasn't tried to have her killed yet, she is attending. She flew in with a bunch of singers and beautiful women and athletes, and at the opening ceremonies, she did shake hands with President Moon Jae-in of South Korea. And Mike Pence is there trying to make sure that the love fest doesn't go too far. And he's even willing to invoke human rights as part of his argument. He said, "We'll continue to seize every opportunity to ensure that North Korea does not use the powerful imagery and backdrop of the Olympics to paper over an appalling record of human rights and a pattern of developing weapons and conducting the kind of missile launches that are threatening our nation and threatening neighbors across the region." So, Mike Pence, champion for human rights. Have you taken a look at Egypt lately, Mike? How about Israel? How about the Philippines? You concerned about human rights anywhere except North Korea? I haven't heard a peep. And speaking of the Philippines, the International Criminal Court announced Thursday it's opening a preliminary investigation into accusations that Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte and other officials had committed crimes against humanity in the government's deadly crackdown on drug dealers and drug users. The prosecutor for the International Court, Fatou Bensouda, said, "My office undertakes this work with full independence and impartiality. As we do, we hope to count on the full engagement of the relevant national authorities in the Philippines." Well, good luck with that, Fatou. Now, on a press basis, Duterte said he welcomes the International Tribunal's intervention because a spokesman said he is sick and tired of being accused of the commission of crimes against humanity. Really. And I expected this next week sometime, but BuzzFeed is always quick to get the lead on other publications. Kevin Collier, described as BuzzFeed's cybersecurity correspondent, writes, "Here's how the Winter Olympics are connected to Russia's hacking of the U.S. election." And the term "it's clear" is used repeatedly in the article. I find three phrases, "it's clear," used in the author's voice, and one in a quote from a source. But what is clear is that the hack of the World Anti-Doping Agency that occurred in 2014, that was after the revelations of Russian doping of its Olympic athletes. And by the way, I deplore that, and I'm critical of Russia for it. But this article offers no evidence. It just says it's clear. We don't need evidence when things are clear, right? And it relies on last year's phony account from the intelligence community that the DNC was hacked by Russia. They have high confidence of that, but no proof. And so it's clear. Now it's clear, says the article, that the same culprit was responsible in both cases. Now, no evidence is put forward to support the idea that Fancy Bear, the Russian hacking unit, did both the claimed crimes at the DNC, I'm skeptical of that, and the hacking of WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency. Now, that hacking did produce the release of the medical files of people, including American gymnast Simone Biles. But the article goes on to undermine its own claim, because they cite an analysis by Trend Micro, now a Japanese firm, saying that 2014 to 2016 was a particularly active time for the GRU hackers. They were trying to get in absolutely everywhere. They created email phishing campaigns targeting at least 12 countries' militaries, 8 ministries of defense, 6 political parties, and 7 media outlets around the world. And that's supposed to be proof that they hacked WADA and the DNC? I just find this really bizarre. It's not what I call journalism. These are media accounts. These are reports posing as journalism. Meanwhile, at the House Intelligence Committee, where we await the release today of the Democratic rebuttal memo to the Nunes memo that came out last week, and this is quite a day to dump, because of all of the catch-up on the overnight action of the Congress on the budget and the analysis of what's actually in that bill that few of the senators or members of the House had an opportunity to read, because the 600-page beauty was only completed a day before they were supposed to vote on it. At any rate, this is a great day for a document dump. The Olympic ceremonies will be on TV, and there are plenty of other distractions on a typical Friday news day. So over at the House Intelligence Committee, there are contractors or carpenters at work right now, and they are erecting a physical barrier to separate the cubicles of aides who serve Republican members of the committee from those who serve Democrats. Practically speaking, I don't know how much those staffers collaborated or worked together in the past, but I think it's just an interesting physical depiction of the divide between the parties over the Russiagate scandal. And over at Consortium News, Nat Perry has picked up for his late father, Robert Perry, who died a couple of weeks ago, and he has co-authored a piece with FBI whistleblower Colleen Rowley about how liberals are planning a major mobilization, perhaps the largest in history, if Trump tries to fire special counsel Bob Mueller. And Perry and Rowley point out that this has reached a crazy level. And just before Christmas, you may recall, there were Democrats who were giving speeches and threatening, or sounding the alarm that Trump was just about to fire Mueller, and it didn't happen. But Move On and a group called Avaaz are organizing campaigns. They have plans to hold 600 events around the country to defend Mueller in case he is fired. And Colleen Rowley, who worked at the FBI when Mueller was the boss there, knows about his dirty deeds. And she raises important questions about his credibility, about his independence, and about his record. And they also raise questions about Christopher Steele. I'm not so sure about the focus on him at this stage. But they note it must be recognized that FBI agents who go before the secret FISA court and who are virtually assured that whatever they present will be kept secret in perpetuity have very little reason to be careful in verifying what they present as factual. And I agree with the issue they raise about the FISA court. As you know, I believe it should be shut down and that everything should be exposed. We have no place for these kinds of secrets and secret courts in the American system, what's left of it. Now, what I'm about to relate to you gave me whiplash, because in an op-ed published at Newsweek yesterday, under the byline of Ian Wilkie, who is described as an international lawyer, a U.S. Army veteran, and former intelligence community contractor, he analyzes a recent statement from Defense Secretary Mad Dog Mattis and says that Mattis said that the U.S. has no evidence that the Syrian government has used the banned nerve agent sarin in the 7-year war that continues and is actually metastasizing. Now, this is significant. And I have to rely on this op-ed because I haven't seen any other reporting on this comment attributed to Mattis. But as you know, I've been skeptical based on the reporting of Robert Perry. And there are two major scenes where the Western media and the U.S. government asserted that Syria used sarin, one in Ghouta in 2013, and the other last April in Khan Shaykhun. And in both cases, when you really unravel the reports, you see that there is no evidence that Syria was responsible. Bob Perry, digging into the report from the International Chemical Weapons Inspectors, showed that in Khan Shaykhun last April, people were at the hospital complaining of the effects of a sarin attack hours before the attack actually was alleged to have occurred. And we saw a video of first responders who were running around in either with no protection or with very modest chemical protection suits. And they would not be sufficient to protect those people from the effects of sarin. So Wilkie here says, the fact that UN investigators were in Syria when the chemical weapon event in Khan Shaykhun occurred last April makes it highly dubious that Assad would have given the order to use sarin at that time. And it was just 3 days after the U.S. government, Nikki Haley at the UN, and the Secretary of State had said that we are no longer pursuing the removal of Bashar al-Assad from power in Damascus. And these are the real-world factors that always caused people like Ted Postel at MIT and others to question the narrative and examine it more carefully. And Wilkie notes that Hans Blix, the former UN weapons inspector, Scott Ritter, former American weapons inspector, journalist Gareth Porter, and Ted Postel, retired from MIT, have all cast doubt on that official American claim or story. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work and who embrace my skepticism, whether it's about chemical weapons or the Russiagate narrative. I know that I'm not in the mainstream. I'm not a consensus guy. And it makes me all the more grateful to people who kick in $5 or $10 a month to support my work here at this independent outlet. People like Benny Alto in Oregon, Patrick Garay, George Reeves, and Andrew Harnack. Each of them kicks in $5 a month. Could you do that? Well, if you answered yes, or your head went up and down, visit peterbcollins.com. And if you need to, go ahead and pause this podcast right now and pop on over to peterbcollins.com. You click menu and pull it down, click Become a Subscriber, takes you to the sign-up page, and in minutes you can set up your own new account, subscribing to the Peter B. Collins podcast. And if you're allergic to PayPal, you can always drop it in the mail to my P.O. Box, Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. That's Box 150660, San Rafael, spelled R-A-F-A-E-L, the second word, and the zip code 94915. This is not really shocking news, but the Washington Post is reporting today that over the past year, Trump has rarely, if ever, read the presidential daily brief presented to him by the CIA. They bring in dogs and ponies and videos and pictures and graphics and arrows. This guy is, he's not completely illiterate, but he does not read. And this is great risk to us because there are details that they may leave out, and we're told that they filter out stuff about Russia because they don't want to tick him off. So it means that he's not really briefed. And I find that just downright scary. I'm occasionally critical of Vice News. I try to watch their HBO nightly newscast once or twice a week. And I do visit their website every day. It's often kind of sensationalized. And I know it's aimed at a younger audience. I do give them credit on their video broadcast for covering much more international news than their mainstream media counterparts here in the United States. But Vice is mostly pro-U.S. government. They're pro-Russiagate. They love to soak up the war porn and bring it to their viewers. But today they surprised me with a story headlined, "The U.S. is propping up a dictatorship in Honduras." And they even acknowledged that Obama, I don't think they mentioned Hillary. Oh, they do. After initially condemning the coup in 2009, the United States reversed course. Hillary Clinton's State Department endorsed the coup regime by allowing it to hold new elections without restoring Jose Manuel Zelaya to power. And they note that the guy who was foisted on the public there since then, whose name is Hernandez, Juan Orlando Hernandez, there were protests about a stolen election. He had to be sworn into his second term, which violates the Honduran Constitution, in a heavily armed stadium with very few bystanders. And so I want to commend Vice News. This is an honest, accurate report. And they cite Hugo Noé Pino, a liberal economist, leading critic of the government in Honduras. All of this is a continuation of the weakening of institutions, the concentration of power, and what we might call the construction of a dictatorship. And the sad thing is seeing the United States support a situation like this. Nice going, Vice. We mentioned yesterday that John Nichols of The Nation is calling for the removal of John Kelly as the White House Chief of Staff. And things got even worse this morning for Kelly. He is reeling from the announced departure of Staff Secretary Rob Porter, who never got his security clearance and handled all kinds of top-secret documents while he was in that post for over a year. And it's been revealed that Rob Porter was a wife-beater. Both of his former wives have made that a public allegation. So John Kelly knew about this for months. But today at a staff meeting, he instructed his senior staff to communicate a version of events that contradicts the previous accounts and apparently the facts. He told those in attendance to say that he took action to remove Porter within 40 minutes of learning abuse allegations from two ex-wives were credible. But it's known that Kelly first learned of the domestic violence allegations against Porter months ago, and the White House staff, which first praised Rob Porter in a statement apparently written by his recent girlfriend, Hope Hicks. This is just too much. Anyway, John Kelly, he's in trouble. We'll see what Trump does about it. We have what is described as collateral damage now from the Me Too movement. Jill Messick, a Hollywood producer, a former employee of Harvey Weinstein's Miramax, killed herself on Wednesday, and she had suffered from bipolar disorder for some time. But her family says it was because she got caught in the crossfire between Weinstein and Rose McGowan. Messick was McGowan's manager at the time that she says she was raped by Weinstein at the Sundance Film Festival in '97. Now, Messick did report what McGowan told her at the time, which she says did not include the term rape. But she reported it to her senior bosses at the talent agency where she worked before she later joined Miramax. The family said Messick chose not to come forward and defend herself from McGowan's slanderous statements, and that then Harvey Weinstein released an email that Messick had written without her consent. Now, I'm not in a position to judge these comments. After all, they come from family members of a dead woman. But this points up the really scary way that this vigilante approach to outing sex offenders continues in this country. And people are going to get hurt. In Sacramento, California, the chief critic of sex harassment and sexual crimes in the legislature, Assemblywoman Cristina Garcia, a Democrat, and the head of the Women's Caucus, I believe, she has now been accused of groping a legislative staffer who worked for another member of the Assembly. His name is Danny Fierro, and he told the Chronicle newspaper that he was at a softball game in a Sacramento park. He was in the dugout. Garcia walked in. He described her as inebriated, slurring her words and swaying. She put her hand on his forearm, he said, then moved her hand to his upper back, started stroking him. Then she dropped her hand down to my butt and squeezed it. And then she reached for my crotch and briefly made contact. Now, Cristina Garcia says, yes, I was there, but I have zero recollection of engaging in inappropriate behavior, and such behavior is inconsistent with my values. She has announced that she will accept a suspension as this is investigated. Also in Sacramento yesterday was the only federal hearing on Trump's plans to open up the West Coast to offshore oil drilling. The Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management held not a hearing, but an open house at the Sacramento Public Library. And they had members of the staff standing around willing to talk to people. But there was no formal hearing where people who had bussed themselves in from coastal cities to object to this were permitted to speak. They were guided to computers where they were told they could post their comments. Kevin Gosztola has another great recap of the way ICE is targeting immigrant activists for deportation. We told you recently about his reporting on Ravi Ragbir, who was deported. He was a leader of the New York Sanctuary Coalition. And Gosztola details other similar cases in his article. A new lawsuit says federal immigration authorities have specifically targeted prominent and outspoken immigrant rights activists across the country for deportation. And on the West Coast, I want to thank Emily Levy, who posted a comment on Facebook from attorney Caleb Aring. And Aring gave a detailed account of February 8th session with ICE in San Francisco, where his client, who is an asylum claimant from Sudan, was allowed to have his annual check-in. Now, he's a man with no status because he's waiting to be declared an asylum and a refugee. But after a 2-hour traumatizing interview, he was told he was free to go. And then the agent said, well, wait a minute, there's somebody outside. The door opened, and 3 to 4 immigration and customs officers entered. They put handcuffs on the client and said they were taking him into custody. The lawyer said, why? They wouldn't even answer him. The lawyer demanded that they tell him why the client was being taken. They said it's because he's in the country illegally, because he overstayed his visa. And this is the kind of double cross that is occurring. Now, Obama deported a lot of people, but there's no evidence that they used these kinds of underhanded tactics on people who have been permitted to enter and stay in this country for specific reasons. Finally today, it's been a rough week, and I want to end with a little good news for Democrats. And that is that the Cook Political Report has done an exhaustive study of all 435 seats in the House of Representatives, and they declare that it is mathematically possible for Democrats to regain control in November. I'm linking to the Washington Post story. It's got some charts that'll show you these various districts, and that the Republican districts that are labeled toss-up by the Cook Report would permit the Democrats to regain control by a 1-seat margin. I'm still skeptical. I think gerrymandering is a very powerful force, but take a look, and maybe we could see a major change in Washington come November. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it with absolutely everyone. You can find it on YouTube and click that subscribe button while you're there, will you?
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.